fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Well, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. John Copenhaver's here. How you doing, John?
Just fantastic, Al. It's been quite a summer.
Yeah, you were just, I guess you were just starring in the opening act at the Paris Olympics, weren't you? Weren't you one of them?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it wasn't controversial at all.
No. Well, that's good. I mean,
Hey, this is the age of controversy, so.
Well, if you're not controversial, you're not important.
Apparently.
Right? Come on. Anyway, so let's bring on our author today. Now we're talking about a new book called Clean Kill, and it's a Nicky Sullivan mystery. Okay, so Anne Laughlin, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for asking, Al and John. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's our pleasure. So before we get into the book itself, let's talk about how Anne got into writing. I mean, I believe this is your sixth book that you've written, if I'm right.
Seven published,
Seven.
Yeah. And I just putting the finishing touches on my eighth. But I think the only really interesting thing about how I started in writing is that I started so late. I was 50 years old when my first book was published, and and then I've been published steadily since then. But up until age 50, it never seriously occurred to me that I wanted to sit down and write. Something happened in that 50th year. My mother died, and I hate to say that had something to do with it, but it freed up a lot of space for me in some ways. And also I read, it must have been after a breakup or something, because I read a bunch of lesbian romances, and I don't know how this, I said to myself, I think I can do at least as well as this if I were to sit down and write. Yeah, so that was actually an impetus for me.
You want to give us the names of those authors? And then we can...
No, and they were, no disrespect to lesbian romances. I just happened to have, I think, picked up some that aren't as good as some others that I've read. And, and the same could be said about mainstream books. There's an awful lot of them where the writing is not that skilled. I was having the same kind of reaction, almost a dare or a challenge. Can I... who I've never written before, can I at least meet that standard? That would be a big accomplishment, going from zero to published is quite a march. That's how it started, and then I've never looked back since then. That's almost 20 years ago now.
Wow, you don't look a day over 30.
Yeah.
That's
30 plus 40, yeah.
No, not at all. No. When you have a death like that in your family, close death and stuff, do you think that gets absorbed into the writing itself, even if the book's not
about
so much a drama? Yeah.
I think in my mother's case, it did. She was a very large personality and a very successful oil painter, and she just took up a lot of oxygen. And I think when she passed away, left me with many thoughts and feelings. But one of them was that I could create without her judgment in my ear. I'll tell you just a quick story. I was trying to learn how to draw, and I drew a bunch of drawings, and I showed them to her, and she flipped through them, and she said, well, they're a little banal. And that was her assessment of my, and so I think I always had that voice in my head. And it freed me up when that went away.
Right. As things do change, So let's talk about, now this is book one, it said, so this is obviously going to be a series.
Yes.
Okay, do you have kind of a premise of what the series is going to be about?
Well, it will follow a general arc of the main character, Nicky Sullivan, who the book is set up that she'll become a private investigator in the second book. She's not an official anything in the first book. I mean, I think it will be an arc of her coming into her own and, becoming more confident. I'm not quite sure, and I might have backed myself into a corner, what to do about the love story in it, because Nikki's love interest is a great character named Parker, and I don't want to see them split up, but I also don't want to have them drag down the plot in the subsequent books. So I'm still contemplating what to do with Parker.
Just kill Parker.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a possibility.
Parker goes into a coma,
Yeah.
And so,
Leaves
you know, other
Nikki
things.
hanging. She doesn't know what she can do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go. See, that's it itself.
Mm-hmm.
Nicky Sullivan. Let's talk about Nicky Sullivan. Who is Nicky Sullivan? What kind of relationship do you have with Nikki?
Well, Nikki is about 40 years old, and she's a former homicide detective with the Chicago police. She's also a recovering alcoholic, and she bottomed out and left the department about 5 years prior to the action in the book. And when the book opens, her job is she's a manager of a sober living home that houses 10, newly sober women. And her job is to just kind of contain the chaos that comes with such a population. But of course, her police background comes to the fore and is of utmost importance as she tries to unravel the mystery. But she is a recovering alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 34 years. And so Nikki is only sober about 5 years, but nonetheless, a lot of me is put into her challenges. They might have been not challenges I face today, but one-time challenges. And in that way, I feel a great affinity with her.
Well, and using your own experience makes it real. The writing becomes real. It's not just describing something; it's real feeling, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I've been told from people who have read the book, that they got a lot out of that aspect of it, because I didn't hit people over the head with recovery. It's not a recovery book. It's not an issue book. But, I'm hearing that people have learned a lot about something that for non-recovering people is kind of a mystery. The whole, how addiction works and how it impacts all aspects of life. So I tried to touch on that in the book. I think I hit the right tone, but, we'll see what the readers say.
Yeah, you never know. So your relationship with Nikki, now do you hear her? Do you see her? How does that run? Or is it like watching a movie? Do you dictate? Like, I hear all these different things. What's your process?
My process really centers around me being in control of that character. You hear people say a lot, well, I started writing and, Nikki spoke for herself. And, I don't believe that's true. I think as the writer, I've got total control over what Nikki does. Well, I do visualize her, but really only in the beginning when I'm trying to establish the character for myself and then for the reader. But after that, I don't visualize her. I don't hear her. I manipulate her, as we do in writing. Even with that being said, I have great affection for the character. I can kind of feel what she feels. I certainly can put myself in her shoes. And that way I go through writing the book with the character very close to me. And I think that's so important to not only establish the tone of the book, but to make it heartfelt, which you can always tell in writing whether, how sincere the writing is. And for me, being close to the main character is a requirement to be able to guide her through a complicated plot. So, I don't see the movie unspooling in my head, but I have a pretty good idea of who Nikki is.
So, Anne, you mentioned that, you essentially started writing because you read some, mediocre lesbian romances. But you're writing crime fiction. So why are you writing? What drew you to the mystery genre? What do you like about it? What's difficult about writing it?
Starting as late as I did, I had a lot of years to read tons and tons of books, but a lot of mysteries were included. I was a fan. Frankly, I didn't consider myself having the potential to write a literary novel. I felt I was a little more plot oriented. I felt that a mystery would be something I could get my arms around. And that was its biggest attraction to me. I didn't want to write romance because it's just not for me. But I think with the mystery genre, what I discovered in reading and then what I've discovered writing is that there are no boundaries. There are no absolute guides or format that one has to follow. You can talk about anything, you can explore anything, and still tie it in with a very tight mystery plot. So I thought it just was a genre, and there's some comfort there was to me in the beginning that a genre does have some expectations. That helped me feel like I could tackle it. And then I just really respect the genre. I really respect the incredible variety of ways that people write in the genre. So it just seemed like a good starting point. Funny, I don't know if it's funny, but the book I'm just finishing is my first non-mystery, and it's a historical thriller, and I just loved writing it. I mean, actually way more than the mysteries I've written up to now. So it's left me in a little bit of a quandary what to write next. But a second Nicky Sullivan will definitely appear.
And what do you think is, you said you're really enjoying the historical thriller. Thrillers have a very different kind of structure, I guess, than a mystery. Thrillers are very sort of about present action moving forward, and mysteries are a bit about like mining the past and uncovering what's happened. How would you contrast those two experiences? You said you enjoyed writing thrillers, so I'm guessing maybe that was a little easier, or I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, and I call it a historical thriller because the pressure is always there to fit your book into some kind of genre for the publishing industry to recognize. I don't think it's a thriller in the classic sense of the thriller, in that it builds to a huge event toward the end of the book. Mine is a little bit more of a roller coaster. It's set in pre-war Berlin, so that my character gets involved with the resistance there. And the thriller part is, their missions are pretty hair-raising, but there are several of them. So it's not that building up to a crescendo type of plot. Hopefully there's anticipation throughout the plot, but there's not that one thing, the bomb in the stadium or something like that drives the plot. I just, and I loved it being in the present and moving forward, because there was so much happening in that time, kind of like there's so much happening in our time. So, I did a ton of research, and I was able to guide her through a tumultuous time and work with her character from going from a more self-centered character to working in the resistance where, everything was looking outside. She was anything but self-centered in that work. So there are a couple arcs, the character arc, the plot, and there's a love story in there, of course. I do write love stories in every one of my books. Yeah, because I like them. I just don't want to center a whole book around them.
You got to have the love story end bad. That's all.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think I did that in one book, and it didn't go over well.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And you and I met 10 years ago at Landa Literary Retreat. And, I think I would assume, and I think the same is true for me, that we've developed our craft a bit over those 10 years. As you developed your craft, what became sort of the difficult things to overcome? What things did you find you had particular affinity for? Yeah, what have you learned in those years?
Well, my first book, I basically sat down, wrote it, sent it off. I did some, typo correction, and that was the extent of my involvement with writing the book. And, of course it shows. So I used to publish a book a year. Now it's, I would say, closer to 2 years because my standards have risen just dramatically. And that's come about as a result of taking some classes here in Chicago at a school called Story Studio. And that helped enormously. But probably the greatest influence and the greatest way I've improved my craft is through the writing group that I'm a part of. It's a 3-member writing group. The 2 other writers are literary writers. I really don't know why I'm in this group, but I'm thankful that I am because I get thorough feedback at all stages of the novels I've written since I've been with the writing group. And the difference is just, night and day, I think. And, I always try to pay attention to craft and improving myself. In fact, I was thinking of taking another class just to introduce some new ideas or, motivate me a little bit or just remind me of the basic craft things that are sometimes easy to forget. I appreciate what I did in the beginning of my writing career because it was kind of great that I did it. But it was just a starting point. And I remember being at Lambda with you. We were in a group with Elizabeth Sims as the teacher. And I remember you reading your work, and we all read your work and being really impressed with it. So I think it was a cohort of some very good writers and things like that. That was only a week long, but things like that I really take on and try to improve myself from.
Do you have a subtext? Do you have a meaning? Is there something you hope the reader gets out of the book, out of the story, besides entertainment?
I think an appreciation of the difficulty of getting clean and sober and the difficulty of staying that way is perhaps not even subtext. It's kind of the underlying core thing about the book that's not associated with the plot. This book, I probably do this more starkly in this book than in other books, where the subtext generally would be, the subtext would generally be emotional health. I think all of these characters start with some handicap in their emotional life, and through various means that's healed by the end of the book. So I do explore some of those things in all of my books. I had, another book where I had the main character was bipolar, and so there was the disease itself to talk about and to write about, but there was also the courage that's needed for her for that character Josie to deal with her bipolar disorder. And courage is also a big theme in Clean Kill, the courage to stay sober. It's such a difficult thing to do that the people who are successful really dig deep. And what does that mean? What is the kinds of vulnerability that come from that make for a more interesting character, I believe. It's kind of maybe an old trope, but the detective who's, 30 seconds away from picking up that drink, and then what happens to have them put it down and not actually drink it. Little acts like that are courageous. And I actually think it's a theme I deal with in Sparrow's Nest, the Berlin book. The whole question of courage, I think, is a really interesting one as it pertains to women. I mean, there's emotional courage, which I think women perhaps excel at, but there's physical courage as well, which we decidedly don't do as well as men because of socialization. And in Sparrow's Nest, she's put in harm's way, puts herself in harm's way throughout the book. And what does that mean for the she's just an average woman. Where does that come from? And what does that terror feel like? Those are things that have always interested me.
So Nikki is a childless cat owner?
Well, she doesn't own a cat because she's the resident manager of the house, but yeah, she is childless.
Oh, so there we go. Yeah, see, I knew it. No, but this subject is so very important to you. I mean, it's part of who you are. And so when you write this in a book and eventually a series, do you feel a little bit of vulnerability out there? Because you put it all out there. Do you know what I mean? And today's world is not exactly the, let's say, nicest, friendliest place to be in with social media. It can be quite, it can be quite brutal, right? So are you thinking about that as you write the words on the page, what you're putting out there and maybe the audience and what they're going to think?
No, I don't. Not at all. I mean, I came out when I was 19 years old and was very open about it with everyone I met, employers included. And I was 35 when I became sober. It doesn't take long after a person meets me for them to realize I'm a lesbian recovering alcoholic. It's like, I might as well wear buttons on my shirt because it tends to come out rather quickly. And because both those identities are extremely important to me, I think clearly the whole subject matter of recovery is interesting to me, but I really want to limit myself in terms of mining this topic. I wrote about it in my just previous book called Money Creek, and that was more from the perspective of somebody who was in the throes of addiction, and this is more centered on recovery. And those two books represent basically what I have to say on the subject. It's not, I'm done writing about alcoholism, not because there isn't more to mine, but because I don't want to be considered like a one-issue writer when so much else is important to me as well. But I did feel compelled in these two books to write what I've learned in these 34 years and to perhaps help people feel more compassionate toward people who suffer from this disease. And if I do that with one person, then it's a success. I would be thrilled.
Who do you think, or who maybe you cite as inspirations for your work? Who are your luminaries?
Right. Well, I have to say Catherine Forrest, which almost every queer woman who writes mystery will cite Catherine Forrest. But, she taught me about really talking about the vulnerabilities of the detective and really humanizing the detective while having a very well-crafted mystery story. And the same could be said for Jean Redman. She was a big influence on me. I suppose Ellen Hart. And those are three writers that I read basically all of their stuff. So something about them drew me to them. And, I only hope to be, a fraction as good of writers as those three. I can't really cite one writer as being somebody who I almost, not copy, but go in lockstep with in terms of my writing. After a lifetime of voracious reading, I think the influence, it really comes from reading good writing and knowing what that is. And really the excitement that I found as a reader of novels, just imparting that excitement about being the writer of novels. When I was, quote unquote, just a reader, the idea of being an author was like being an astronaut. I mean, it just didn't seem possible if I even gave it any thought. Having that happen and having me be able to say I was an author put me, at least in a different standing toward those writers I've revered, and also made me want to develop, refine my own voice. And I think I've done that over the course of the 7 books. so that, you know, people can pick something up and maybe identify it as an Anne Laughlin. A lot of people tell me they can tell from the humor in the book that it's mine. Probably because it's a little bit the way I talk. But I've had so many different influences, I have a difficult time narrowing it down. But those three lesbian mystery writers were core.
It's really interesting. Catherine was my workshop leader my first time at Lambda, so I owe her a great deal as well. So you mentioned that you might move on to different topics and you want to not be a one topic writer. Are there any topics sort of buzzing through your mind now that you would like to write about? Like, what does the future hold, perhaps?
Well, if the next book is a sequel to the Berlin book, I'm going to have that main character end up in the Spanish Civil War. So I have her moving from pre-war Berlin into another fight against fascism. And so I'm beginning to research that, which is fun. And if it's a Nicky Sullivan mystery, which I will write one, I just don't know if it's next or after that. I haven't really settled on any kind of topic because I haven't given it much thought. But it's an interesting question because recovery was maybe the one thing that I could write about where it really comes from my own experiences, and a topic that's important enough to write about. I can't off the top of my head think of any other thing that I'm as intimately knowledgeable about, experientially and just as an observer, as the whole question around drinking. So that means picking one that interests me greatly and researching and finding out whether it's a topic that doesn't necessarily have to be the focus of the book, but resides in the book either as a subplot or as a theme, that it takes careful thought, and not only because it has to interest me, but it has to interest the readers. So yeah, the answer is no, I don't have any ideas at this point, but I do have some idea of this trilogy where Sparrow's Nest, it's called, the Berlin book, is the first book, and then she goes to Spanish Civil War and then into wartime, probably Germany. So I would love to write that trilogy. That would be, if I accomplish that, I would be thrilled beyond belief. And there's no reason I can't. It's a pretty daunting, I did tons of research for Sparrow's Nest, and it was fascinating and didn't seem like a burden to me. I'm wading into Spanish Civil War stuff, and it's so much more complex that, it's got me wondering how to boil that down into the plot of a novel that's, that one can follow and understand. I don't plan out my books, for instance, with Clean Kill, I have failed to think of an arc that would cover, 3 or 4 books. If I write a second book, I really have to pay attention to that. So I think I'm not a writer who looks down the road very far. There's that great saying by E.L. Doctorow about, what's happening, about the equivalent of a headlight on a dark road. It's that far ahead that I know what I'm doing, but beyond that, it's all dark.
That's like me driving.
Yeah, right.
No glasses.
Right.
I can't see either.
Yeah, I hear you.
Well, listen, because this is a mystery thriller action sort of book, is this one with violence in it? Do you depict violence or acts of, action like that? Or is this kind of more of a cozy, like how do you say it is?
Well, it's definitely not a cozy, even though Nikki is an amateur detective, but she's got a background as a homicide detective. So I don't put that in the cozy category. And it's far more noir or just even dark than a cozy would be. I don't know if I call it noir, but it's, there are serious things at stake for Nikki, and as she tries to tries to find a serial killer who's, killing recovering alcoholics. And so it's all off screen until the very end at the, the climactic scene. There is some on screen violence, but it's nothing too grotesque. I think I learned a lesson with the first book I wrote, which is called Veritas, which was more like a cozy. It had a college dean was the amateur detective, and it was set on a campus, and then at the very end, I had the killer, isolate my main character, and she was very violent with her and hurt her, wounded her severely, and I got a lot of reaction to that because it wasn't in keeping with the what a cozy is supposed to be. And it also, I reread it not too long ago, and I thought, it didn't have to be that violent. So, yeah, I think I started with the idea that I had to be fairly graphic, and I have backed off of that. But still, instilling in the reader the sense that the violence is real, the lives lost are real, and there's nothing cozy about it.
Do you do social media? Do you have a website? Do you have what would you like people to know in order to find you?
I do have a woefully neglected website, and that's AnnLaughlinWriter.com, and I'd love to hear from people through there. I'm also on Facebook. You can just search on my name, and I love hearing from people through Facebook as well. And really, that's probably, I'm a little behind the times. I think Facebook is still my primary way of connecting with my readers. I haven't made the transfer to Instagram, though I'm trying. Yeah, so, I'm in that stage where I'm supposed to be publicizing a book, and I just, I compare myself to John and realize that I don't do nearly enough.
Nobody does nearly enough if they compare themselves to John.
I know.
Are you kidding? Are you
but not only is that a little intimidating, it's also inspiring.
Sorry.
No, it's not. But it's motivational, and also I get some great ideas. So your busyness has effects on the writers as well as the readers.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, it's good. Yeah, you see someone like John, and you even try to get half that, you've got it made.
Yeah, no, it's seriously true.
Some days I wonder if it's all worth it, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, you seem to enjoy it anyway, right? You're out there, and I know.
Yeah, I try not to do anything I just hate. That would not be good. No.
Yeah. You seem to enjoy all the different events and all the different stuff. So you're having a good time, right? So that's all that matters. We're going to put all of this up on our website so people can find you, and it'll help get the word out, as well as your book. I was going to say the book we're talking about is Clean Kill, and it's a Nicky Sullivan mystery. And you better go out and get it. The author's been with us, and Laughlin, so thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun talking with you guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ann.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.